You got 6 o'clock in your life.
Thank you, Carrie. Just before we start the process of this meeting, I just want to make sure that since this is the first time we've done a special meeting for Finance and Human Resource, Carrie, we did meet all the legal requirements of posting this to the public and or the common council.
Absolutely.
Call to order. Councilmember Mark Davies.
Here.
Councilmember Scott Harrington.
Here.
And Councilmember John Rapp.
Here.
With all of us present, we'll move on to our agenda. City-owned property. I can take over on this one. Currently, I utilize the county tax surveying map and or quarry information from Otsego County tax website and found, and I could be dead wrong on this, but I found on a quarry that I did several months ago that there's approximately 99 parcels that the city of Oneonta owns. And I found that rather interesting to have such a large number of parcels. So I can give you the one that's closest to us. There's a 2-acre parcel, approximately 2-acre parcel. That's basically landlocked under the current scope of who owns what property. And there's no way to utilize that. Yet the property to one side of it, we'll call it in front of it, is coming under new ownership. And I've already approached the potential new owners and they said that they would be interested in it. So I think this is an opportunity for us to look at all the different parcels. We can look at it as a committee. We could also look at it with city staff and just try and find out what parcels they are, identifying them, and then analyzing the actual utility of them. Are we actually utilizing all 99 parcels? Any thoughts?
No, I think that's a good idea to take stock in what we have and what we might need them for or not need them for. And if we don't really need them to get them back on the tax rolls, I think that would be, a good long-term plan.
And it might also, besides putting them on the tax roll, it might be an opportunity to lease the land to potential individuals. So it could be another type of revenue stream besides just the initial sale and what we get for it.
Yeah.
I think, Mark, you and I, we talked about this once, and it might be just looking at some of the parcels and adding it onto a nearby property owner, parcel owner, and just increasing it to them, maybe at no cost, depending on the size. I mean, there's a lot of little parcels that are out there. But just getting that aggregate up back on the tax rolls, I think would help.
Yeah, man, I guess I'd like to suggest maybe we think of, before even beginning to view any of these, kind of what criteria might we want to think about for types of parcels that we might want to try to add back into the tax rolls. What's the criteria for things we might want to keep intact? There's, what's the logic behind them? I just think to have some parameters before we begin looking at it. I agree with you totally. I think we need to look at those and do an assessment, because there are, and I'm looking at them right here, there are a bunch of really funny pieces out there that we could certainly benefit from having some scrutiny about how we might want to go about, addressing those.
Well, what I liked about your idea was that by adding it on to a neighbor, then trying to get right of ways for people to access the land, because like you said, they're little oddity shapes. It just negates all of that and we get into a better relationship. And I think property owners as a whole would look at it going, well, yeah, I could use that extra 200, 300 square feet or whatever they are, because there are some really small lots that are out there. But
Right.
yeah, I understand and appreciate that of what the parameters are. What are we going to utilize them for? Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I think that'd be a good study to do. I'd certainly be interested in participating in that in terms of.
Yeah, I think we want to, when we're starting to talk about right of ways and stuff, definitely have our streets involved with it, our DPW, our city administrator. Because are we, with some of these right of ways, are we, is it ever going to be feasible that we're going to build a road there? If we're not, maybe it's time to rethink. I know we try to think about expansion, but there's I know right away down by my house, and I don't see how we would ever do it because you'd have to go through somebody's kitchen. So, you know,
Hmm.
and I can't say, I don't know if it's still on our rules. I just know that, you know, growing up there, that, you know, that was always a joke, growing up that, you know,
Right.
he'd lose his kitchen if the city ever had to put the right of way through there. So,
Just to, for inference, do you have a list of parcels?
Well, I think, Mark, you jumped on the county website, right?
You search City of Oneonta, and I can't count them quickly, but I think Lynn's probably pretty close to accurate. There are many.
And is that mapped out or they're not addresses necessarily there?
They're all addresses, and you can, there are several different links that you could zoom into the property and take a look at it through the GIS. There's a quick
Sure.
map, which doesn't work. But yes, you can be able to access the sites and take a look at them that way.
but maybe some of our parcels we could use as a development too on something. You know, think outside the box a little bit.
Right.
You know,
Greg, has there ever been a study, a comprehensive look at the city-owned property?
Not that I've been involved in, I think, sometime someone else involved. I think there was a list created, and I'm not sure what sort of effort was put into it. Which ones were dispose of, but
Right.
I'm sure we can generate a current list of whatever information you might want.
Right.
So, that sort of.
Exactly, and that falls in line with what Mark is suggesting, is that we need to create a list of our criteria for keeping and or for no longer in need of.
Well, and then also, I mean, there's an argument to be said for some parcels just being kind of for the public good, if you will, right? So
Mhm.
there's places where people might utilize, they're not parks, but, and I don't know if we have any on that list, but yeah, I think creating that criteria would be helpful.
Mhm.
And it's interesting to me that I'm unaware of parcels, the word parcel and saying and owned by the city of Oneonta.
Right.
This is the first I've thought about that. But given that we have 99 parcels,
Mm.
whether something, I have no idea how to think about them yet. If they would be things that could be literally sold, and a private owner would then say, okay, I'll take this, I could use it or hold it somewhere, I'll have to pay taxes, how that would work. But also ideas that neighbors might be able to come up with. They might want to own such a thing instead of the city and do something with it. It's a personal story. My wife in New Haven, her dad, well, the grandfather who built the house also had all the property inside what was eventually built around it. It was like a park he literally had that went behind, I'd say 25 other houses.
Hmm.
At one point, he tried to ask the neighbors, would you like to own this? You give me a bit of money. No interest because he took care of it. And they would have to, one, take care of it, two, pay taxes. And it didn't seem, it was kind of a gift house, but the only pain that he was able to inflict is say, then get your tires and other junk out of here, or I will come
Right.
after you.
Right.
But it cleaned up and fascinating though. So what is the potential in a lot of different ways? Is this something that would come up for, say, the housing committee? Or is this, or
Scott, you're on the housing commission.
you know, that's actually that'd be a good thing to bring up. With the housing commission would be the parcels and stuff and have them take a look at, you know, because that
Potential development.
potential development, potential, you know, yeah, I think it would fall in good with housing as well.
Hmm.
well, it's an interesting thing because
Yeah.
it's not mentioned in the paragraphs that went into describing what the housing commission can do
Mhm.
to advise us.
Mhm.
But in part, that would be a valuable addition. What are the assets that we have?
Mhm.
That we own? Is there anything that could be done? But there's groundwork to be done with that. Anything we decide to do is going to be a project.
Mhm.
It's going to take human resources and a plan, et cetera. So who's going to do it?
Yeah, if I could suggest, I think by creating some criteria, we can very quickly winnow this list down. And I think you're right, Scott. Let's give the kind of buildable lot type of, on a road type of thing. Have the housing commission take a look at those. But there are some that I think might be on this list that probably aren't of interest. I mean, aren't buildable or whatever else. And I don't know if we want to include paper roads in this particular list. They're not here, but we might want to consider. And I don't know, Greg, if we have any remaining. I know that there was some years back, 10 years ago, there were several that were sold off. I think Lynn, in your ward, there were a couple that were sold off. So I don't know if we have any remaining.
Yeah, I actually bought one. It was called Lafayette Street.
Okay.
It was 50 feet wide, 540 feet long, and it abutted my property, so I ended up purchasing it. Not from the city, but from the neighbor who bought it and then decided he didn't want it.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think we want to add those to the list, and then we can take this list, narrow it down to what's buildable or not, and then begin to have some planning around what we do with these, because
The last time I remember property being sold, there was a bit of a discussion in council, and we needed to create a legal way to sell the property, unbuildable, but sell it to Hardwick. I think it's an odd part thing, but it had to do with people painting the wall and that sort of thing. But we had to go through the process of voting on that and saying, and no property will be sold or dealt with from the city until we vote on it. There needs to be a council approval on these
Sure.
things. But
We're just at
they
the,
asked us.
right. We're just at the incipient stage of it. It's just an idea I threw out there. But I can start putting us into an email where we're
Sure.
looking at the criteria requirements for keeping and then listing.
Yeah.
What is that? What is that TV show? Love It or List It?
You too can flip
Right?
flip
Isn't
the
that the name of the
property.
show? Love It or List It? Yeah. So,
well, it might be not to put you on the spot, Greg, but maybe, I mean, your knowledge might be good to have Greg weigh in on that list as well. You might have.
Oh,
some
absolutely.
criteria
Oh, sure.
that we can-
absolutely.
Yeah, I
Um,
think it would be easy enough for us at some point, I can't put a timeline on it, because I'm sure that other things will come up tonight that we'll probably have to work on, but we can kind of put together some background information, get a GIS map. I've got one in front of me from 2019, just has the parcels highlighted, we can get the list and
Yeah.
size, and indicate whether they're utilities or any sort of factors as to why, from our perspective, staff should hold the property.
Right.
Something to build on.
And this is something that our GIS specialist could be working on, correct?
Yeah, it's just.
I don't want to add to
It's-
your
No,
list.
I wouldn't be.
I'm just,
I would ask for some help there.
Yeah.
It's just-
Okay.
so in the meantime, you're working on that, on the physical property list, looking at from your perspective, and then from us, we'll start coming up with criteria for why or why not we want to hold on to the property. Okay? Does that sound all right to everybody?
Yeah.
The next item on our agenda was tax incentives and or abatements. Just kind of wanted to throw this idea out there. There are some tax incentives that have been introduced. I don't know, John, if you were still, if you were on council when they were being first introduced. I apologize, I thought I had it in here. I'm sorry. Thought I had it with it. There are some current, some uncurrent tax incentives that Mayor Miller started in his interim. Couple of them had sunsetted, and I had worked with Gary on this, and and the city attorney trying to figure out how we can bring them back to life. It's still kind of in status quo, but I just wanted to throw out to this committee, what's your thoughts on creating tax incentives or abatements to spur the economic development of not only commercial and industrial, but also residential. Again, I think Mark, you and I had talked about it, Scott and John, I know we've talked about, are we going to be able to create opportunities for people to invest into their property and then just spread that taxable assessment out, 8 years, 10 years. Look at the big picture rather than saying, hey, we need your money today. A lot of folks are deterred by that. So how you guys thought about it?
I'm good at looking at every option out there. I mean, I think, some of the people approach me down in my neighborhood, they'd like to talk about the broken glass theory, and trying to keep the neighborhoods upbeat and looking good. And it was just amazing. One person does something with their house and how quickly it starts going down the street for people to invest in their properties, make them look good and stuff like that. And our big plan is to try to get people to want to live here, get businesses to come in here. The first thing a business does is they come in and they drive the city. They're going to come in and they're going to look at the neighborhoods and stuff like that. So I think if we can spur any kind of development off of that, and plus give people a reason to want to invest again and really have their properties look good and knowing that they're not going to get hammered on assessments and stuff, I think it's a good idea. You judge a city by how it looks and the roads and so I think it's a good idea to go and look at it. I really do.
I think the number was 485, I think is the tax number that creates that opportunity to have a tax incentive by abating the taxes for an 8 to 10 year scheduled out. I think that's the number. I apologize. I thought it was in here.
Is this something that the legislators got to vote back on again because they sunsetted?
We have to go through that whole process. And then in fact, I think those two that were sunsetted, and again, the numbers are escaping me off the top of my head, is I think they would have to go back to the state legislation. So it would be a lengthy process to go through that.
So Len, showing my lack of understanding about some of these things. Reassessments. If we were to reassess properties, is that controlled by the state in terms of the time frame for reassessments or in terms of the reassess level, or is that basically here through the city assessor that we reassess properties? I mean, can we also control that? Because I'm thinking that also is a way to incentivize people fixing up their homes, as Scott suggested, is how we look at that. Whether, the usual thing is you come in and you kind of reassess the home value, and the home value rises, the people pay taxes. Is there a way to look at that a little differently? And if so, that might be something we can control locally, which I believe we do, rather than, I think the other ideas about tax abatements are certainly fine, but what else can we do? I'd also like to add one more thing in terms of tax incentives. And I think Katie and I had this conversation early on, is that we have 3 major employers here, the 2 colleges and the hospital, or the healthcare system, Bassett. Is there a way to incentivize their employees living in the city? I'd like to explore that. So if we are losing people, we're not capturing them, and that's problematic.
Could you tie that thought process into, say, topic G, the commuter fee? Is that how you could incentivize them, or are you thinking strictly if you haven't resided in the city of Oneonta, you purchase a home in 22 to say 26, we'll do a reduction in your taxes of X? Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah. So I started talking with, before I was working at SUNY Oneonta, the chief of staff there, about perhaps could we couple with SUNY Oneonta to create a program where they would incentivize as well on their end. And that was something Scott and I had talked about, with Hardwick being another one, an obvious one, and then, I never got talking to the hospitals, but I don't know about the commuter fee, but to me, there's an opportunity to try to capture more of the folks that, the employees of these three large institutions, to be able to try to keep them here within the community, because many of them leave immediately.
There are interesting models about this in Philadelphia, for example. The University of Pennsylvania and Drexel University and the College of Pharmacy, they were in a neighborhood that was a little bit like Columbia, sited in a place where you didn't want to go more than a block away. Yale is similar. You have to be careful about which way going north or south from the Yale campus. And part of what the Penn and Drexel did is they said, we want to have this campus be safe for students. Our employees, and they had a mortgage incentive, a mortgage program, where if you bought a house within a certain distance from the school, the University of Pennsylvania, this university, would fund a certain percent or do a low mortgage for you. And it really helped in this pivotal time, a pivotal time when you really would be frontiering. But it made people do it, and it changed block after block after block. So if I go to Philadelphia, I have in my mind a tattoo of this is the neighborhood I don't want to go to from 30 years ago. Now it's completely different.
Right.
It's very safe, very desirable, and one of the hot areas. But that's the kind of thing that the school was able to do for its own interest.
Right.
But tax abatements, I've also seen tax abatements in advertising in different cities that say, buy this place, 10 years are left on the abatement. You will not have taxes. Because the city incentivized the building of a different sort of neighborhood by saying, yeah, you can do this, we'll get curb cuts in for you, and we're going to incentivize the buying of a property in this area by offering tax abatements to the buyers or to whoever.
Right.
But it's an interesting question. I don't know how much it would work for us.
And that's long range thinking, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
It's
So
not a quick fix. It just gives us, a schedule of where we're going to be 5 and 10 years down the road, which for me, I like that. I'd rather know that we're offering these opportunities for people and we know where they're going to be in 5 and 10 years.
Makes my home ownership cheaper for a while.
Mark, could you just shoot me a quick email on your idea?
Sure. I wouldn't say it's my idea. I just voiced it. I think it's been kicked around by a lot of people.
The idea that you voiced.
I want to see him shoot the email.
The other thing about that is I don't know very much about incentives or abatements. I am guessing somebody sold that concept to the University of Pennsylvania and Drexel. So he said,
And I
hey,
also
I got an
think
idea.
at a
We need
local level,
employees. We don't want to stay here. We don't get hurt, and we don't want our students mugged.
And I think at a local level, that's what Dick Miller was doing when he was the mayor, was
Yeah.
trying to incentivize economic growth. And so I will dig up that email. I'm trying to find it
Cool.
now, but I'll dig up that email and send it to you guys of which ones were on our, actually, I think it was from Carrie. Carrie, I think you were the one that hooked me up with that, wasn't it?
Local laws.
Yeah, the local laws. But anyways, I'll get it to you guys.
It's a good thing to follow up on and learn more about.
The water and sewer rates. Excuse me. Greg, where are we at with the program? I believe we paid for a consultant to come in and take a look at our water and sewer.
Wasn't a traditional consultant water rate study. It's a software program that we can kind of do it ourselves, but we have a consultant that's remote that helps us through learning the software, that sort of thing. But we're not ready to begin this yet, but this fall, as part of the budget process, that will be presented.
And is in that software, that consulting thought process, are they looking at it differently, say like with a tap fee? And residential, commercial, industrial would have a monthly tap fee initiated, and then whatever water use they use, it's on them, correct? We would figure out the rate.
Yeah, we can look at all sorts of different types of rate structures and analyze how that would affect sort of what we have now, and something similar to what we're talking about there.
And this software can project the different thought processes, right? So if we looked at a tap fee and then we said residentials would pay X per gallon for water usage, what would that mean for revenue stream for the city of Oneonta, and then same for commercial and industrial? Right, it has that ability to kind of look at it,
But
scale it.
what it is essentially is financial modeling software, geared toward water.
Water and sewer. Do we have that many users that don't use the concept water in, water out? I think car washes would be an example if they're recycling water, maybe laundromats. I don't know if they do the same thing.
Very few, I think, the concrete plant, which is no longer in the city. Forget what the code says. I think if you prove that you're using 25% less than the amount that, that if a significant or substantial portion of your water that you're paying for is not going down the sewer.
Right.
Prove that's not high. The city can consider sewer board. I don't know who other than the sewer plant, maybe there are a couple of others. But laundromat wouldn't be one, obviously, because that water's still going out the sewer. Car wash. Somewhere, so I'm not sure. Who else, but that's it.
I think we only have one car. I can only think of one car wash we have in the city. But they do have the option of recycling the water. I know that technology is there, but okay. And then with this financial model being applied towards water and sewer rates, we can take a look at the difference between a residential rate and a commercial rate and get a little bit more equitable, because unless my math is wrong, we're about 3/1000ths of a penny difference between a large volume user and a low volume user.
I'm not going to quote any numbers now because I don't have it in my head. I don't think that that's necessarily accurate off the top of my head. But
Okay.
That's just something we'll definitely talk about.
Get a little bit more equity.
And we don't differentiate between residential and commercial, industrial. It's based on water usage.
Mhm.
So the more water you use, the higher rate per gallon you pay. There's steps.
Mhm.
built into that. Essentially, for that conservation pricing, so we encourage as well.
Right.
So larger users, which is in some respects greater strain per se or demand on the system to size appropriately.
And it's also the reason why we have a system the size that we do. We have what, 3 million gallons of static water source. Majority of our water mains are 8 to 12 inches in size. And that was based on the pre-thinking of having commercial growth, right?
I mean, somewhat, yes. Size of diameter of water main is primarily for fire protection purposes. You wouldn't necessarily need the size mains we have. It's just for domestic water. Another factor is density. Obviously, if you think of a street that's 3,000 feet long, it has 10 houses on it. That's much longer water main to serve 10 residential customers. You think of some streets in the city that are like that, whereas you have downtown Main Street, there's the same length. And, a lot more.
Exactly. Okay. Is there any other thought processes on the water and sewer?
Now, I almost look at this as just raise your rate. More money will come from doing such a thing. And so like a business saying, well, we're going to charge this for a break service versus, our typical low price or whatever. We're not going to compete for business in order to do this because we'd be able to do that. So it's a great thing to think about. It's one of the things that we could do to take an existing fee structure and simply increase it.
Mhm.
So, it's worth considering and all the implications of it, sure.
Then as I've been out campaigning and just kind of running this idea by people, like, to be honest, I've gotten nothing but positive feedback of eventually coming down to a monthly billing, similar to other utility companies. People have really responded positively to that, saying that would do their home household budget much better than waiting annually to bill them out. Because a lot of Oleanans are struggling from paycheck to paycheck, and they just don't have $458 laying around when we send that 1 month after their property taxes. I've heard it over and over and over. I did in 2019 when I ran for my council seat, heard the same thing. So now it's citywide.
In some ways, that makes sense to me because it's like when I order on Amazon, I can pay $1,200 for this item or only $13.75 for 3 years. Oh, I got $13.75. That's easy. But it's just another way of thinking about this. But if we did an increase in rates to say, here's a trade-off to make less of an impact, because you'll see a percentage increase when the annual bill is much more substantial than, the additive, obtaining that increase over 12 months.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, you figure it, like if you get charged $500, you're roughly $41 and some odd cents a month.
Mhm.
It's a lot easier to pay that per month than it is all of a sudden, here you go, here's this 500, and here's your taxes on top of this, school taxes on top of this. This one's, next thing you know, you're paying out 3, 4, 5, 6 grand out of your pocket. And so, I mean, I wish they would do that with taxes too, find a way where you can pay in,
Mhm.
kind of like they do with the paycheck, they take so much out, and then at the end of the year, it's, well, you paid too much, here's a little bit of money back for you.
Right.
I don't know if that's possible to look at that maybe on property tax and stuff like that. I know we tried it once with the county, and there was some sticking point. I can't remember what it was because it was so long ago, but we're looking at, something like that. We're also looking at if somebody got behind on their taxes, that they could do almost like a loan. You get a book, back in the days when we used to buy the car, you get the book.
Mhm.
But you could pay in on that as well, so you wouldn't have to worry about losing your house, because we thought it more beneficial for somebody to keep their house and pay into us than to try to foreclose on it, and then you're trying to sell it, and then you're trying to, because they're not whole foreclosure process, and houses start to get run down. And so, I mean, maybe there's a way to maybe think about property taxes. If there's
So
a way to do that
prepaying,
too.
is that what you're
Yeah, like a
kind of
yeah,
prepaying?
prepaying in, and then whatever the difference is at the end. I mean, I don't know if you can. I mean, I'm sure it's going to be a headache for somebody.
Right.
Yeah, I've got 2 concerns about monthly payment, and I certainly agree it's a lot easier to be able to configure that monthly. But there's 2 pieces. One, if people were using credit cards, the charge on that is pretty steep. So the monthly fee, and for those who have it, it's gonna roll up. So I think we need to figure out how to get our credit card system working so that it's not as costly to the taxpayers.
Mhm.
That's a taxpayer concern. On the second piece, then, if they're not using credit cards or they're using, dropping off a check or whatever else, that's a lot of time on the city staff. And so how do we make a more efficient system? So if we create something that certainly aids the taxpayers, I have no problem with that. I think that's important. We need to figure out how to make it more efficient so we're not burdening our city staff and costing more money by needing to hire a part-time person or something to process this. So I think there's a kind of balance there that we need to find.
So to
Maybe like an
kind of answer your question there, Mark, it costs 2.65% on a charge from the city for a credit card. I think Jenny's told us that a couple times. So you could go ACH, and so we could set that up so then there's no cost to the taxpayer at all through having the routing number already established with the city and do it that way.
So what's ACH, Lynn?
You're directly linking your banking account to the city, and they're allowed to withdraw. I use it all the time for different business aspects, the ACH. We have clients that use that to pay us. It's just a matter of getting the banking information, so.
Do we have the
no
capacity to
charge.
do that?
Huh?
Do we have the capacity to do that right now?
That's gonna have to be a Ginny question. I believe the software is there, but I'm not positive 100%.
Is that, just by an analogy, can the city have its own credit card?
Great question.
I mean, credit cards are great business. But they have a superstructure, that gives them all kinds of advantages in terms of if you're paying with a credit card, the credit card company is now assuming the risk of non-payment.
Right.
And they're also stretching out at usurious rates, what the person is going to pay. But if there's some simple method that a person could use a local bank for or something, it might be a way to eliminate the credit card. Then we're making the credit card company either rich or we're putting our people in jeopardy. So is there a way to think between the two things? That's all.
Mhm.
I don't,
Is there a way, I know very little about this. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I just go, I swipe, I don't even worry about if I'm being charged or not. Is there a way that the city could do it and we don't have to charge that? Like, I mean, like, I'm assuming we go through a company, but I'm not sure.
Mhm.
I don't know, Greg, Carrie, either one of you kind of know.
I can't speak to the specifics. It would have to be something that you
Mhm.
need. She's explained it before, when we've had these discussions, and obviously she can explain it again much better than I can, but I know that that's just not possible for us to avoid that fee. I mean, I should say.
that's for the
not
credit.
possible, but
If it's a credit
not
card,
practical for
the
us.
credit card fee is, that's on us. So we're paying the fee.
Correct.
Right. and we-
Okay.
But we put that back over to the resident that utilizes that service. That's what they're getting charged. So if it's $5 that they're trying to pay off, they're gonna get charged 2.65% towards $5. That's their total bill. They're not just paying,
Sorry.
they're not just paying $5. They gotta pay 2.65 on top of the 5. Because that's what the company, I forget the name of the company that we utilize to handle those financial transactions. That's what they're charging us.
Day, I believe.
Yes.
I mean, realistically, if the city were to waive those fees, it's us, the city.
Eating the 2.65.
And where does that come from if you're talking about paying for the water bill, for the water fund,
Right.
is what they're paying. They're paying.
And to Mark's point, absolutely, I'm thinking of city staff, so we need, when we're doing these services, we need to make sure that the cost of the employee doing the work is covered, or it negates the reason why we're doing it.
Right.
So
Then
It just
sounds
doesn't
like
make-
increasing revenue.
it's just, you just
What
spin
about-
your wheels.
It's a little like threading the needle, because I also noticed that if you pay with the Amazon credit card on Amazon,
Right,
they'll take 5 or 10% off the purchase,
okay,
knowing that they'll take your house eventually. if
so
you
that's where
don't
you're
pay
going
them.
with the city having their own credit card, okay.
Well, I just, it's interesting because this is a way.
Right.
Is it beyond us to have a scheme? And I don't mean that in a nasty way,
No.
but to have a method that would allow a benefit to the person. Also, I don't, but just complexity to it.
Right, and we need to
Seems like a good
acknowledge
idea.
that there's gonna be city residents that are not techie enough to, and they don't feel secure enough to use their credit card, so I think that's why you listed, will they be dropping off a check monthly? We should be able to provide them options. For the ones that want monthly, absolutely, the ones that want quarterly, and then the ones that want annually. There's been people out there that it's like, I don't mind paying the annual, okay, well then we'll just keep you.
Sure.
What
The
about like,
pre-tax though, I thought that's where you were going with your
Yeah.
question. I've actually had a few people
That's what I
approach
was-
me and they want to prepay, and
Yeah.
I think I've asked Ginny about this, and there's some kind of a law that doesn't allow us to do that. But that's something we can definitely
well, here's
talk about further.
another thing. I mean, like online paying and stuff. Like, is there a way that we could accept, like if they pay online, like a PayPal or something like that, and this PayPal, if we accept that, charge that percentage point
Right.
that we're doing now? Because I don't buy online, really honestly. I think another thing, it's like PayPal.
Right.
I'll be honest with you, I look at my wife, say, hey, can you order this?
Daniel, I just don't
So-
want to be
I-
rude to you, but we're just going to do committee members and then at the end, if you want
That's
to
totally
chime in,
fine.
we'll do it that way, okay? All right, thank you. So the prepay is something I can ask Jenny about.
Maybe if we did come up with our own credit card for city bills, I don't know. Then I think we could probably set of course, I'll probably have to make like a city have to have like a off business part, you know what I mean? I'm sure there's probably gonna be some hiccup or roadblock there too, but
Right.
it's worth looking into. Try to make anything easier for our residents.
What about one bottom line on this for revenue generation? Simply raising the water and sewer rates
Mhm.
would accomplish some part of that. But by accomplishing that, there may be complexities that we want to mitigate or motivate people to use use a system.
Right, and ultimately, we're not just collecting money to take our annual operation costs, but I think Greg, you can explain this better than I, but we're not putting enough money aside for a CIP for the water and sewer lines, meaning we're not going, well, in 2025, we're gonna go to these streets and replace the pipes because they're 120, 25 years old. We don't have that type of schedule, correct?
Well, we have a capital improvement plan, but we're not able to, like anywhere in this country.
Mhm.
Assets that are 100 years old. Should have been replaced by now, if you look at their useful, expected useful life. The thing with the water and sewer fund, if we're fortunate in a sense, is that we control can raise rates to be appropriate to pay for expenses. It's just a matter of how much we get. Pay for that. Whereas the general fund is different, because you're limited on taxes. That's where you guys need to create maybe your.
So money that's coming in for water and sewer is then limited to, they're put into a reserve that has to be paid out for different issues with supplying the water and sewer service.
Exactly, so when we talk about budget
Okay.
process, the water
So the money's
fund,
sequestered.
water revenues can only pay for water fund, and sewer for sewer. Could make it, we could make a general fund.
Sure.
contribution. Probably not a good practice. when you can-
Yeah.
But if our fund was super healthy, then we wouldn't have had to do what we did for the Catella water line, right? That's an unforeseen incident. Unfortunately, insurance didn't cover it, but we didn't have enough funding,
Yeah,
unrestricted fund balance to.
You want to have a reserve in the water fund and the sewer fund. so
Okay.
General fund to pay for emergency type projects, and if you don't have to bond for projects, and you're not paying the interest on those over years, you save money over time. The other thing to think about is, to Jim can talk more about this, but you don't want to have too big of a reserve fund and overburden the regulators now to build up that fund to then spend it 25 years from now. You want to have to be consistent, not coming in as enough, but I don't think bonding will ever go away.
My suggestion is that if we build a healthier fund, then we're not bonding, but we also can be proactive instead of reactive. It seems like a lot of our infrastructure, we're more reactive than we are proactive
Somewhat.
for water and sewer in the ground.
Yeah.
You're doing an excellent job with the plants. I'm not suggesting anything against that.
We're able, we prioritize based on what the budget, available budget is. Right now, as far as water mains, we're replacing our smallest diameter 4-inch water mains. That can take another 10 years at least. Plenty of other mains that are just as old, but it's water mains.
Moving on to topic D, create public-private partnerships. I think a good example was what happened earlier this year when we did that with Springbrook. We're making an investment alongside them for that pass-through. Primarily, I think it was what the largest chunk of that was, what, $330,000 for an elevator I don't know if there's any other way around that one. That's kind of limited cost or limited choices for the cost. The heating, the HVAC, I think it's going to be hopefully air source for heating and cooling. When we did that tour, we found that the HVAC was up on the roof. They actually used steel pipe to go down the 3 floors to get down into that lobby area. So hopefully we're going to renovate that and go with something new. But my point is that by the city creating that relationship with Springbrook, the city is going to get a new partner coming into the Oneonta, and I think their budget was well over $5 million. So that's what I'm suggesting here, is that we create more public-private partnerships. Another good example is what's going on with the transit hub, whereas now we have an economic developer looking solely for the city of Oneonta, and talking with developers. The list of 110 developers went out, and we're getting responses on that. So we look forward to creating another public-private partnership. I think that's something that we as a city entity should be doing more of. I didn't know what you guys were thinking of. And so thought I'd throw this out there.
If I could, I mean, I think you've raised some really good examples. I think we would benefit from a little bit more strategic thinking about this. I don't know that I'm the right person to strategize on this. I think, frankly, who sent this around, by the way?
What are we looking at?
Thanks, John. There was a comment there. I don't know, it was a
Oh, yeah, John copied that up. It's kind of funny. I was reading the same article this afternoon.
But one of the points late in the article is that there should be a standing committee of some sort. And in my thinking, this might be a really good thing, in all these particular areas, to have a standing committee that looks at these. Because in my thinking, that public-private partnership, excellent. We need more focused people that know how to create these partnerships, build these partnerships, opportunities that we might not be able to think of. I think it really would benefit from really good thinking, and not someone like me who has no idea about this. But I think there's great opportunities here. The rail yards is another example.
Yeah, I don't have too much more to add. My only thinking maybe would be, like we're doing that heat pump study and stuff like that, was maybe that would be a place to,
Mhm.
I know Greg had the foresight to bring that all down Main Street, but maybe that's something that if we could get it big enough, maybe we could get some houses that want to tie in on that and get a private public going there for heat versus, stuff like that, don't know if that's possible, but, just to try to look at things. I mean,
I think ultimately that is the goal with the geothermal, isn't it, Greg?
To expand.
To provide an opportunity, not just for the hospital, but for the residents and anybody else to tap into that system. Wasn't that?
Yeah, if it's, to the extent that it's feasible, it's. I'm sure in a minute, as far as how far you could potentially expand it if it were economically feasible.
Right.
I think we're focusing on the downtown initially because there's higher density, there's a little more road first, especially with the hospital. That there's a chance that it might make sense.
Right.
But in the future, as things change, other forms of energy and heating are not going to be as cheap as they are now. Then sort of change. It might make more sense to expand it out.
And again, that utilizes the city water system, if I remember right.
It could potentially, but we're looking at not the city water distribution system, but possibly the wastewater collection system. We had the idea suggested about exchanging heat with potable water mains, but that's not something you can do at least at this point. It's not
Was
allowed
that
for-
DOH shot that down?
Yeah.
and that could go back up to our city-owned property. If we're gonna look at possible geothermal in the future, some of our properties might be where we could drill some of those wells for that.
Mhm.
So, we gotta kind of be careful when we say all these parcels that, do,
Good thought.
that's a good thing there too, that we could do as a city for private public partnerships there too.
I mean, to me, this is a big step, right? I mean, basically, we're becoming kind of a utility provider. And if we're gonna be thinking more about the geothermal and other areas of geothermal usage in the city. I hate to talk about grants, but maybe we need to look at this more comprehensively and what is it, I mean, beyond what we're gonna be doing now, but what's the geothermal potential?
Mhm.
How might we be able to kind of capture that and work within that? Because I think that's where we're going. And so how do we use that geothermal potential to provide kind of heating and cooling to residents? It's an interesting question. If we're thinking strategically about it, we might not see the revenue benefit, in our time here in council. Well, I don't know, maybe people stay here for the rest of their lives, but we might take a couple of years, 10 years to be able to see that, but ultimately it could have a real nice kind of net effect down the road if we think that strategically.
Isn't there like cities out there that have like their own, like a utility offset for like, I know they do like a lot with electric. But I mean, this might be something where the city we could look into and be like, well, we could do this utility with the heat and geothermal, because we have this land, we can do this. And, you could potentially go into a park and build it. And you're not gonna really destroy the park. You'll have a couple of drill holes and maybe the thing where it needs to go, but all that's gonna grow back over again.
Mhm.
And so now your parks are getting a couple different uses. And I mean, I'll tell you right now, if I could afford geothermal heat in my house, I would have done it. Because, it's your heating, it's your cooling and long range, it pays for itself. So I think that might be a really good thing. And I didn't even think about that as we're doing this, that could be a real good public partnership there. We might even think about, maybe we should see about doing a utility off, with the city. And
That would be part of the study, is determining, does it make sense? And how does it make sense to run it? Is it a utility that the city owns, similar to our water system? And
Mhm.
we enter the thermal utility world, or is it something that NICEAG moves in that direction? Is there a really provider now, and everyone knows we're going to be eventually moving away from natural gas? So what is the bit of business model look like in the future? So all questions to me.
And that's what that survey will prove.
This is what the study will start to explore. I don't think we'll have a definite answer by the end of the scoping study. The scoping study, this phase is kind of, is it feasible and what might it look like? And if it is, we can apply for more funding from NextEra to do the detailed design. That's where we kind of flush all that out and potentially go into implementation after that.
So the study will look at these two different lanes, because it's definitely two different lanes. One was the water distribution or wastewater distribution system, and the other would be true geothermal, where we're digging either vertically or horizontally, right?
Yeah, this study is just looking at the waste, right? That's all this is looking at.
No, this will look at the different options for heat
Oh, it will.
exchange. I mean, you can take the exchange heat from the earth, geothermal, or from wastewater and waste heat. And it's also going to look at that load balancing in some cases. So much, in bigger cities, it goes against normal thinking, but there's actually cooling happening in the wintertime, and there's heating as well, of course. And there could be balancing going on in that respect. But
I didn't know
it's
they
going
were
to look
looking.
kind of at everything.
That's great. I didn't know they were looking at that. So I mean, that then becomes really valuable information for us thinking about
The criteria.
exactly.
I already put it down under the criteria list, so yeah. Yeah, no, it's a
Right,
good
or at least
idea. I think
if
this
there
is
might
what
be-
this meeting's all about.
Yeah, right. There might be potential benefits there. We need to think about that. We wouldn't want to do something short term and then wreck something that could be really beneficial. long term.
Absolutely. Again, that's why I brought it up, because I want to be able to take a look at this strategically at 5 and 10 years down the road.
Yeah, yeah.
So this is good. I'm glad that we're having this meeting. Starting off with city staff pay scales based on city residency. It's been mentioned a couple of times, taking a look at a difference or incentivizing city staff to live right here in the city rather than elsewhere. I don't know what that structure would look like. Has anybody done any homework on this?
just some theories on it. Something that might tie into this as well is maybe instead of we're looking at the pay scale, maybe we could look at incentive if you live, if you take a job with the city, you move into the city, for the first couple, how many years you could have a tax break of a certain amount. If you didn't want to do the pay scales, but the pay scales, I was thinking like these are just arbitrary numbers. Like say a position starts at 90,000. That's to live in the city.
Mhm.
If you choose you want to live outside of the city, then maybe it would be, $10,000 less.
Mhm.
So it'd be it's kind of, hey, you want this extra $10,000, you got to move into the city
Right.
to get that. That'd be kind of like an incentive to get here. I mean, that's a good enticing tool of, yeah, I'm gonna move in the city because I want that extra 10 grand.
Mhm.
We might get some people out there that say, no, I'll stick with the 80. That's fine because I already have my house. I've had it for 10 years and I don't feel like it.
Right.
But we tend to move too quick in my eyes to waivers for everything. But if we could incentivize people to want to come in, and part of what we're looking at with the housing committee that we're also looking at too is, with the housing stock, some of it isn't that we don't have the house, it's we don't have the house because somebody doesn't want to put the money into it. They, that's why I said, well, maybe it's like maybe a tax reduction for a little bit. So it incentivizes you to get this house, invest in the house, build the house the way you want it, renovate it, and then,
Mhm.
so like 5 years or something like that. I don't know what the years would be. It's just an idea that, kind of,
So kind of two-pronged, one for housing.
Yeah.
And maybe a tax reduction.
Yeah.
On a schedule, or the other through just the initial salary.
Yep.
And or hourly rate.
Mhm.
There would be a difference in whether you lived here or not, because initially for the example that you gave is that if they don't own a home.
Right.
And they're in an apartment, then what do you do?
right.
I'm trying to play with that idea. I appreciate the idea. I was thinking what we just did in terms of incentives for bus drivers. Is there a possibility of doing incentives for folks that are buying homes or have homes within the city to give them X as a signing bonus for coming to the city and staying here. So rather than basically do a different pay structure, which I don't know, we'd have to talk to Katie, see if we're even able to do that. Would it be a nice signing bonus for people that might help them to jumpstart into their fixing up their homes? Because that's the problem, right? Our homes, our home stock or housing stock is old. I don't know what the average housing stock within the city is, but it's got to be below 1950s, I imagine. So, everything's older and people don't want to, there's a lot of money to invest in these things to be able to get them up to speed.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you, my house was built in 1900. It was built down as a quick stick fab house down by the railroad. When the railroad was all steam coming through here, and then a farmer bought all these houses from the railroad and moved them up to where they were on his field, and then he sold them from there. So every time I model my house, I'm always interested to see what I'm going to find. I found railroad ties, I found old box cars with the old hardware.
Should be
And I sit there and I cover the old hardware back up because I think it'd be cool someday when I ever sell my house and somebody else takes it and they remodel it for them to find what happened. But, so it's you find a lot of old houses here, because you got to remember, we did start really a lot with railroad and stuff like that. So,
So need to find out if it's legal to actually reduce an hourly rate and or a bonus structure, which may or may not include a reduction in taxes.
So they start out maybe like a lower salary, but like what you're saying with the sign-on bonus, if you're here, then you get X amount, and then after so many, you get another one and another one,
One thing that's probably worth doing is just gaming that out. How many people are moving in? How often would we do that? What would the impact of that be? What would the complaints be from other people who said, I fixed up my house and I got nothing for it.
Right.
But if I just moved in, I could, it's just, we know that people are going to find fault with just about anything that it affects their kitchen table conversation about money.
Right.
And we'll have to, and we always have to consider that. Yeah, the citizenry here are not, it's not a group you can just tap into anytime you feel like it. And we do think about that. And I know there's also that question of where do you want to do it? And what are fair incomes for people? Because I think, one thing is to pay people a fair pay for the work that they're doing, not necessarily incentivizing them to live in this. I mean, you can talk about that, but I've heard it, and I think everyone's here about nobody helped me when I worked for the railroad. I built my own house with my bare hands. And now, everybody's being taken care of. This is the nanny that's taking care of the new people coming in, is giving them money. That's a nice nanny. I never had one of those.
Well, as I was sitting here listening to everybody's ideas, and I'm thankful for that, but I think in the last couple of years, I can remember back at least twice that people turned down city employment when we said that they had to move in. They literally walked away from it. So
People want to move.
we're not known for paying high salaries.
Well,
So
I could also say something to that though, too. If that's your gonna be your driving thing, then maybe we didn't want you here at the city. I mean, it's a harsh thing to say, but I mean,
right.
every day I go to work, I know what I'm walking into, and it's my decision to be there or not be there. And I know how much my pay is, and
Right.
if I don't like it, I move on. So, I mean, to sit there and say we have to pay these enormous salaries, like was said the other night when we were talking about it, that's not always the case. Just because you pay these good salaries doesn't always mean you get the best person either.
Right.
So, I mean, there's arguments on both sides. You want to be somewhere, where you're compatible with other people, other municipalities or something around you. But you also got to, even in the private sector, but you also got to remember the benefit package that comes. That's what a lot of people forget. Your health insurance, retirement, you're in the retirement system, which is state retirement system at that.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of other incentives to go with that. So, I mean, I don't mean to talk harsh, but if
No,
that's your driving force,
Right,
it's
it's two options. It's
you know.
absolutely, it's two options. And kind of similar to that is where it's coming from, just where we're talking public employees to public and private, is a commuter fee. So you would be able to get both public and private with a commuter fee. I looked this up. Right now, it's only primarily New York City and or the boroughs plus some communities just north of them, Rockland.
So Glenn, can you explain how that works here? Because I'm not familiar with the commuter fee. So how is that fee assessed? How do you recognize who's a commuter? And then how is it billed?
That's the difficult, there's a model I know of, and that's the Philadelphia wage tax. I don't know how you go about getting the state to approve a tax, but if you work in the city, you pay the city taxes. Any day you do work and you can demonstrate you work outside the city. I had one of those jobs, I was working 20% of my time outside of the city, no tax. But anytime my butt was in the city, I paid taxes that were taken from my paycheck and delivered to the city. And when I left Philadelphia, I got notices all the time about taxes I still owed them. And I had to decide whether to catch me or not, but I wound up paying them.
Right.
But that's because they made an estimate of what you owe the city by the fact that you work in it and the paycheck is being cut through by the city employer in the city. So it's a wage tax. Commuter tax is interesting because it's easier to take a look. And who was it? Al Colon had numbers about this. The numbers of people who leave Oneonta and go to work somewhere outside of Oneonta.
Live outside of Oneonta.
No, they live in the city of
Oh, live in,
Oneonta, but
okay.
they work outside the city.
Okay.
And then that notion of having, people who are outside the city but come into the city, use city resources. If you have a heart, whatever it might be, but they, my mind doesn't even follow this. That's why I'm like,
No, we were
Scott,
talking about the
my wife
community. So
handles
if you
everything
live-
with money.
If you work in the city and you live outside the city, then.
Yeah, but he was
you-
just tracking how this would work and how would you balance this out with people paying? Not necessarily, but this is catching the monies from people who are coming into the city using, ostensibly using resources.
So is the
and they're quite
Philadelphia one
famous.
an honor system? I mean, is that how it's based?
No.
No, it's up to the.
No more
employer,
than, no,
right?
I mean, no. If you live outside the city, you're still being paid by the employer inside the city.
Right.
I don't know how you do it. I mean, I just know it's done and it's still done. In New York, if you work in the city, you actually pay a tax. And New York, and I think Yonkers does it, if you're a city employee, government employee, and you leave the city to live in New Jersey, for 2 years at least, you have to pay this taxes that you'd be paying before you're free at last, thank God.
And
Almighty.
you're talking about property taxes?
No, income tax.
The income tax.
It's an income tax.
Right.
It's a percentage of your
So when
income.
you say you're gonna leave Yonkers, for your example,
I
you
go
would
to- I wanna
continue
go-
paying, you would continue paying for 2 more years.
I think that's the last time I gave it a scant look.
Right.
And the details of that are always, that's where the devil lives.
Sure.
And I don't know how you do that. I have heard that we can't do it because the state would have to approve any new taxes. These are just rumors in the air. I don't know.
Well, no, I was briefing on the internet and I found that also that the state legislators would have to approve,
State legislators.
would have to approve of the new tax. And right now, like I said, it's the 5 boroughs plus Rockland, Nassau, Suffolk, Orange, Putnam, Dutchess, and Westchester.
Somehow they got it in time. I don't know what a new one would take.
They're actually, again, in my surfing, they're talking about charging for driving a vehicle inside the downtown area of Manhattan. So,
Yeah, you have to figure out how do we deal with that? But that's a very special consideration. You'd never be able to tax a vehicle because you drove in on it. But, it's an interesting thing because we have, I'm confused about this. We pay a property tax. The property tax is paid to the county. Correct?
it's broken down. The city collects a certain portion, the county gets a certain portion on property taxes.
But okay, I'm just curious with that because so I'm not paying attention. Is it, do we have a taxing authority? Or we have property
Under
taxes?
general municipal law, cities, towns, villages.
We
and
get
county
a
are
percentage of that
taxing.
back, but the county gets it first and then disperses.
That's the
No.
system that we have here. Like, we have the city has worked with the county, so we're paid in whole.
Okay,
So that if, and then they take any taxes that aren't collected. That's how the county forecloses on the houses, and that's why we can't right now in the city, because if we did that, the county could say, then we're not gonna make you whole anymore.
yeah, that's,
So-
the county as a government entity
Right.
has made the deal favorable to them and apparently to us. Okay. All right.
I mean, it's favorable to us because like during COVID, we knew that we were gonna get this block of money coming in. You know, from the taxes, the
Mhm.
county's gonna give it to us, and that was the county's job to go. I know we collect it. Then after a certain point, I believe Jenny's gotta send everything up of what was collected and what wasn't, so that they know with the county treasurer.
And a point that John made there, is revenue lost by users of the city, and we're not able to get the full kind of tax or whatever benefit from it. I think Larry Malone, a number of years ago, with Dick Miller, looked into this and created a proposal. And John, I think you were on council at that point, so you might know even better. But he looked into at a proposal that they actually brought all the way up to the state, tried to walk around and kind of talk to folks about it. I would suggest if we kind of think about this, we might want to ask him to present that proposal or whatever. it
Who
might
were
be.
you referring to? I couldn't.
Larry Malone. When
He wrote
was-
a paper on it?
paper/proposal that they literally brought up to Albany and tried to get, as I recall, tried to get some traction on it. What it was a way of beginning to try to
Mhm.
get at some of the users that don't fully, we spend quite a bit as a community supporting, frankly, as the student population. So how we might be able to go about getting some of that for use of the resources, but we don't fully get it back because of the way we have some of the.
Yeah, but if I'm correct on that, there was a time when for 2 years perhaps, the state gave cities like ours that had a state university in the system a certain amount of money,
Mhm.
$200,000, I think, is what we got. But that only lasted for a short period of time, and then the state said, well, what's Oneonta got to do with me? I get elected somewhere else, so I'm not interested in supporting the cities that happen to be, in a way, burdened by state universities. But that was one. There was also something, I know Ed May, Al Colon, other kinds of people had come up with a number of ideas that involved a commuter tax. However you want to think about that, whether that's the right wording for it. And they were talking to someone, and at least on one side that I heard of it, because I don't know who to believe about anything. But one side is there were some lawyers saying, and we will help you do this. And it was almost contingency fees, but it never went anywhere. I don't think it was welcome. And it really was never explored except in people going to the mayor's office and talking about it and then hearing we can't do it. But it was never anything that well, did you ever hear that, Len?
Briefly heard about this paper. Is that something that you might be able to get a hold of? This white paper that he wrote?
Ask them, yeah.
If that was to get money from the state universities
You're saying
for,
They went to Albany and they actually started lobbying.
This is my recollection going back, I don't know, 6-7 years ago.
Okay.
So, but I think that they were trying to get some attention on something that they thought that they had an opportunity to bring in a revenue source into the city.
and that would be from the university.
Again, I don't remember whether it was linked to that or not.
Because I remember that as something we got.
So, and perhaps it was, but it
Greg,
was.
do you recall the amount we were getting from the state university?
200,000.
200,000 for maybe 2 years?
For 2 years, and then you break in another year.
It was two.
Senator Seward.
Yeah, we had somebody who helped make that
For
happen.
every student, for certain ones.
All right, but that's an interesting thing about whether cities of our sort have clout to do that again, or do something, at least get that attention again.
Moving on.
All right.
Kind of pushing time here. Marketing of development areas within the city limits. The preface behind this was actually marketing land that's developable within the city of Oneonta limits. I know that Otsego now, that's the primary owner of the largest developable land in the city of Oneonta. I don't know what their marketing budget is for that. Are you thinking of enhancing that? Is that what you're thinking? Or just,
Well, I know like with the railroad yards,
right,
I'm up to the point where Otsego now needs to decide with a realtor what they're looking to bring in. Me as a city council member, I can't go any further with it now until Otsego now and Jody decide what are we doing. And I don't know how we prod him along to, so one thing might be kind of like we did tell with the buying the old Oneana sales building, is we might sit there and say, maybe we ought to take the land so we can get this project going. I don't know, that, or maybe we just need to invest in the railroad yards in the way of lighting, signage, make it look like this is an industrial area that we're gonna develop. And start the process. Gray, do we own the road down there, or is that still a private road? So we may want to look at one of the first steps of, maybe we should take the road over, build it, get the signage down there, get things cut back, get that, I think we got own some land down there as well. But, try to get it cleaned up, that way, so it looks, so when you're driving through and you say, oh, this is an industrial zone, here it is, here's the road, industrial zone this way. And when you look, and the road's no longer potholes or concrete that's falling apart. Like when you go by the old dress factory where the antique place is, that road's in pretty bad shape. So maybe that, if we start investing going down through, if we start showing that we really want to do it, maybe that's how we make it more marketable to try to get people in. There's a couple different ideas there, I know, but that's just,
It's good to hear them out.
I'm kind of frustrated at this point that it seems like, I know Mark's been on the committees and talked out Siegel now. I know you talked out Siegel now. I'm sure John's talked out Siegel now. And it just seems like, oh yeah, it's here. And then it's boom. It's like crickets. We just can't seem to get this going.
That particular road, it's private property on either side of the road? I know there are businesses there, buildings that I know are owned by someone privately. It's when you cross the rail, get to the Who and cross the railroad tracks, except the road is owned by Oneana.
Roundhouse Road is private by Otsego now.
Otsego now owns that road, but they don't own the property that is adjacent.
They own a pretty sizable,
Oh, okay,
vacant property there. Obviously, the built properties are privately owned by others.
yeah.
And I'll tell you, I've talked with Norfolk Southern several times on the phone, and they're a committed partner. They want to, this is like, they have a whole part of their railroad. They have a special part that works with development.
So they have a real estate development.
Yeah, with for industrial parks.
Right.
And when I was talking to them, their big thing was, you just gotta, now they gotta tell us where they want so we can start. We have the connections and stuff, and I just, we say we want to get this going, and I know maybe we can cut the trails in, because we talked about walkways and trails and stuff like that, at least maybe start getting them broke up, so when you drive down through, you can see what the parcels are going to look like. Or
I think when we were down there though, Mark, didn't we, you went back and found out that the city actually doesn't own the land. What I thought was the impound area had been sold or transferred, the parcel had been transferred over to Otsego now.
Yeah.
Now what you found out during your research?
Oh, it is.
So I don't, yeah, what I
So
thought was
maybe
the
we don't.
impound
I thought
area,
we-
we don't even, we
It
don't
still
own that.
says city impound on it, so I'm like, oh, we still own this.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now, and it's just short of what the old impound lot was, is the line.
Right.
So there's an open field there, and kind of to the east of the open field, east of the impound lot is the city property. To the west of that open field is all that's here now. But that's all, that area is all the wetlands that they can't develop unless they were going to go down the DC route, and I don't think they're interested in doing that. So that is possible to kind of tie into some trails, but I think this kind of goes back to that public-private partnership. I mean, beginning, how do we have these conversations and try to become real partners with them about developing this land and developing in a way that we think will be really advantageous to the city? I think is important conversations we need to have, and we haven't had those conversations.
Because we have established businesses down there, they're doing well, they're employing people. And to Scott's point, if we made it more aesthetically pleasing, it might open up the doors to other potential developers.
And that's always been my belief is that type of natural beauty can drive people who want to be there. People, they say this is a great place. I want my resident or my employees to live in the city. Look at this great place to work. They have walking trails. They can walk during their lunch break. I think that can drive some developments, which is why I certainly think that developing that one strip, and if we can go further and work with Otsego Now to go further, is a good idea. But to your point, lighting and different things like that, how do we work with Otsego Now to be able to kind of showcase that? What role can we play to help Otsego Now showcase this and be able to present this this whole thing? I was pushing for, and you all probably remember 4 years ago, 3 years ago, whatever it was, a plan, a comprehensive plan for this that would allow us to think about of a long-term, what I was calling an eco park, kind of a greener thinking industrial park that would allow us to attract some really interesting businesses here that would want to come in and plant themselves in Oneonta and use this particular place in a really interesting way. And there's some great examples of that within the United States about cities partnering with private entities to be able to make these things happen. So,
And that's not something we can do because Otsego Now and the owner Otsego Now needs to be doing it.
right, but
We can't, what we can and can't do.
yeah, but
Or
the
what we're
question
in
is
the
what role,
collecting, because we're trusting them, because they're supposed to be working in the
Right.
city's interest.
right?
And now we want to work in their interest.
Well,
And it's just this,
Exactly. It's a weird relationship. So I think that's exactly the question. What role do we want to play and what relationship do we want to have? And can we play a role? I guess that's even the bigger question in facilitating some development in this particular area. Or are we just basically completely at the kind of mercy of whatever their timeline is or whatever their thinking is, and we have to sit back and let it happen? I guess, I'm interested in trying to be more proactive about it, which is why I got involved and tried to push them along in some different areas. So to me, I think it's having a conversation about what role can we play and can we play a role in pushing it, because it sits there as an untapped resource that really could have quite a benefit to our community.
That's why I was thinking, maybe if we took the road over and we maintain the road and start there, and then if everybody sees that the city's now investing in it, because we
Mhm.
took this road over, we're gonna make sure that the water and the sewers down there for this. And and they see this, the city's gonna, we're gonna invest in this because this is what we know we have to do this because we need this development.
Mhm.
And the city's taking a good interest in it. That might help you. That might be the prod that really needs to start.
Mhm.
I mean, Greg, I don't know what it takes to take over that road. I don't even know if it even meets any kind of specs, what specs it needs or anything else. So I don't know how much it's gonna cost, but
It's certainly a full reconstruction, and it's hardly a road, the one section looks, this giant craters down there. And the first section, I see we're now paved recently, so it's in decent shape, but it's still. I think the question for me, my question would be, how do we build a road or build a developable, partially developed area when we don't know what's gonna be there? How do you build a water system when you don't know what you're serving?
sure.
It seems to be putting the cart before the horse in one respect, but certainly no authority on whether building roads will bring development.
And in that particular case down there, the road and the infrastructure are separated by the private parcels, right? Isn't the water's in front, the sewer and the gas are in the back of the
I'm
buildings?
not sure where gas is, it might be along in the grass in front of the sewer line. It really depends. I mean, there's a drawing, there's a conceptual plan, and so our engineering takes part of it, generic environmental impact statement for Otsego Now that has some sort of a layout, but to commit to building that layout of infrastructure, not knowing what might come in.
Right.
You're restricting yourselves to those parcel sizes. I don't know how let's look at that.
And they had massive square footage, 10,000 square feet. I think were some of the smallest buildings. So, right. And that might not be desirable.
Right.
I'm just thinking
Well,
about even how you get,
What's that?
That's the
how do you
challenge.
get from that road
I didn't know what-
to cross? How do you get from that road to cross over into the part that I really think we're talking about developing? The only thing I've heard, well, it seems to me that Ed May has several buildings down there. They're all rented, constructed, fully insulated, no cost of operation and that sort of thing, the way he does. And he had made a case, or maybe somebody else said, well, since we're these businesses and we're employing people, we are in the city, we're still in the city. Will the city invest in developing this which would still be either buy this road and make it a city road, or get the permission to do that. But the question is, how do you get over the hump? And speaking of the other hump, I was thinking about even getting into the
rail yards?
the rail yard, to get into the rail yard. When do I know when I'm trespassing on railroad property versus the Otsego now property? And am I allowed on this? I'm personalizing this. Am I trespassing if I go in there to run?
Oh, you are, if you're running on private property, yeah.
And
So-
that's,
So if you go down North Fonda, which is.
I'm just faster than the,
Straight, eventually.
Yeah.
the railroad tracks.
yeah, I'm just thinking about, if we were going to when I even have some more access to there for people who experiment with walking on the paths, or, where would we cut our paths to get into it? And are we allowed, would we be allowed, we don't own that land. So why would we, we're in
So
Hanford.
I could answer some of your questions.
Sure.
So there are some signage that identifies Norfolk Southern's land.
Mhm.
Primarily that is to the left and or behind the private businesses that you see that are already established down there. Between their backyard and then, we're gonna say the 6th Ward, there's just a fence that.
There's a
that's
little
there.
strip where there isn't any.
So there is some signage that says stay out, railroad property.
Mhm.
To your question
As-
about the trailways, that was to the right. And that is just in the incipient stage. It's just been a conversation. And, obviously it'd have to be pursued with a relationship with Otsego now to start cutting in
Mhm.
any kind of walking trail system, which it wasn't really that long. I think it was,
Yeah, it was half mile, I think. It's 4.93 acres, that whole.
right, yeah, it wasn't much.
If I could, just to kind of close the loop on this, maybe that is the best starting point, is to have some conversations about that area of
Mhm.
developing a trail system. And that begins, at least the partnership begins a conversation. We can, work with some of the existing entities within the city. The Susquehanna Greenway Committee is interested in trying to develop that. They've already been talking to the DC. It's a manageable project. And to Scott's point, at least we start building something that is manageable. It's not a several $1 million, road build out, but it's something. And I think that if we looked at targeted that area, it would fit into what I've heard is their kind of overall master plan for that wetland areas, is to have some walking paths. So maybe that's kind of a nice project to be able to handle, brings people more down into that area. We can begin marketing it, and it's at least the beginning of a relationship that maybe we can enhance that area. So
That's the relationship with Otsego.
Yeah.
Now, okay. We don't have a relationship with them now.
I think we have a relationship. I'm saying we don't have a relationship in terms of working on a project. And this could be a project that could benefit both of us, and we could be able to execute this, build the partnership, and begin to try to bring folks there.
I continue to be in an oppositional mode, but why would we want to do that for Otsego now?
I don't see us doing it for Otsego now. I see it doing it for the people of Oneonta. By building recreational space in the 6th Ward, I guess.
On private property.
On some city property and some private property, to me, it's a win-win. We have a bunch of trails.
So if we had their agreement that we could plant grass, trees, and build trails, we could go ahead and do that.
Well, as I'm saying, working with CO now to work on whatever their kind of existing plans for trails in that area are, to begin to conceptualize how we might be able to have a trail that runs east to west along that particular area.
I'm just being devil's advocate.
No, I appreciate it.
So we pay for it to help them?
Well,
I think we're already paying for Otsego's now salary through our county, the taxes. They're paid by the county.
I also think you're missing the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is trying to get development down here.
Yeah,
So if we can help a little bit to start getting the project going, the residents are the beneficiaries of it because that's adding more for our budgetary
But also employment
and
opportunity.
employment opportunities and possibly better jobs and possibly better salaries and, you know, it's that whole thing. If Oneonta doesn't invest in itself, why would anybody else?
And I think
but
Mark
if we're
said
talking
early on
about-
that you started working on something 4
Right.
years ago. So here we are 4 years later. And I'm sure there was several years. I mean, I've been around that rail yard for 30 years, you know, and I know the two gentlemen that purchased the property, they tried developing themselves. They were somewhat successful. It's just been lagging and there's a lot of potential there. So, but let's move on to the
Mhm.
last item on the agenda, and that is the other municipalities and the revenue source. And that's primarily the paperwork that is before you. I don't think you have one.
I don't have
you don't
A
have that?
copy for
You don't.
Scott. John, do you want to go through this or do you want to
No,
let
at-
us
at
read
this-
it and then?
What I thought I'd sent something out, but basically on I think on one of the pages, and I think it's the one we were talking about, where, and I'm just using language that is sensible to me, but maybe no one else. These are the faucets through which money may flow. Some of these faucets we have and might want to think about increasing the volume of money flow through that faucet or that line. Some we don't use, we don't have. So if we continue to see finance as having at least some responsibility to talk about revenue improvement, you know, and that's with the taxpayers in mind and the welfare of
Mhm.
people who can afford and can't afford. But we can be more strategic in just whittling some of this menu down. Right now, it's a very extensive menu. Some things might be easier to deal with, some things more difficult, need state approvals, et cetera. But it would help us organize, could help us organize in a way where we're looking at something better than, this just came to my mind.
Right.
And we could be more systematic about saying, where could we do something
Mhm.
like this? For example, our fee structures for baseball rent or short-term rentals. What do we charge now for a short-term rental permit?
Actually, don't know.
I really don't know.
Well, I know that they can make a lot of money. I mean, that's essentially why they're getting the short-term rental unless, but I don't know if the fee that we're charging for that is, could be increased and simply say it goes to people who want to operate in a way that has an impact on neighbors, et cetera, but you're basically getting a short-term permit or permit for short-term rentals. And I say it's $200
Mhm.
per summer or per permit. How does that fit in? Is that enough? Do we want to have more? I used to enjoy the parking fines in Oneonta. They were cheaper. And I never really cared about the ticket. I could pay it out of, it was $5 or $10 maybe. Simple. I'm not going to worry. In New York, my car would be towed. I'd have to pay $500 at the compound to get it out. And as far as free parking is concerned, which is a different issue, you can't park in. I refer to Philadelphia. I ask you to find a city where you can easily find free parking.
Right.
You can't find it. And this is another thing about a revenue generation. We may want to be moving to changing the notion of paying for parking. And that's perfectly legitimate. It's city land.
Mhm.
The people who go in there are not always needy.
Right.
Folks who can't afford to pay for parking. There are people who could afford to pay for parking, but they prefer not to. And I'm not demonizing them, but say, sorry, the city is changing. And we can't afford to maintain these things now that we built things on it. People hate it. Only a few of us like the idea of pay for parking.
I'd be interested to see if, I mean, since we had that system a while back, I'd love to see if we have any data that could show us, did pay for parking, what was the impact on our downtown
You
merchants?
can get, oh, that's another thing.
Right.
Downtown merchants, 3, 4, 5 of them, I don't know, claim that it was stifling their business. It was hurting them. And I know that we've gone through a cycle of pay for parking, don't pay for parking. Our financial director can tell us what we made in parking and she's presented that to
Right,
us.
no, she has. I guess I don't want to make I wouldn't want to make a decision on something in isolation of the greater context. So what is the impact of a parking fee on the merchants from the standpoint, does it discourage folks from coming downtown to use the local merchants? Or, what, I guess I'd like to understand a little more to understand the greater context.
Sure. And if we get reliable data about that,
And I'm sure it's
it would
difficult to get. but it would be
interesting
helpful to
because you're
understand it.
forecasting based on opinions.
Greg, didn't they do a study on parking?
Most recent parking study was more of an occupancy usage study,
Mhm.
not so much about an analysis of paid parking. It didn't look at that at all, based on the fact that just prior to that study, you conducted, so we had taken the parking meters out.
Okay.
When we had the muni meters, they were, longer ago, we had those individual meters on certain streets, and when those went away, we eventually installed the muni meters in certain areas, and the lower level of the parking garage, west and west Costa for the time, and then they were taken out. We could certainly look at that data, we have that somewhere, we can compile it. I think it's a bigger discussion than just looking at that data report, because you should really, in my opinion, look at the entire downtown. This is a market for parking, so when you charge for parking in the lower level parking garage, when the upper and middle level are never full, that's
Right.
not really the way to do it.
Correct.
And we might want to treat, I'm going too deep into this, but we might want to treat parking in the garage somewhat differently than we treat parking
On Main Street.
on Main Street or on Deep Street or
Mhm.
Ford,
Mhm.
where, free parking is a great thing. Can we afford to continue giving it away?
Right, because we're maintaining those parking areas. It's
Maintaining
costing
them.
the city of Oneonta
Mhm.
taxpayers.
I don't mean to be vindictive. I mean,
It's
we
a-
don't have to do anything. We could lower our taxes
Right.
and just work on a more Spartan sort of budget, because we could be one of the greatest cities around. You want to move here because we don't have taxes. I don't know if that would fly, but
Well,
we're used to having the power to tax,
You missed
power
this.
to this and power to that. And
We'll do it on the
so
next
we're
one.
done.
John, I'm gonna wrap us up, but I wanted to give Councilmember LaParge an opportunity to comment.
Oh, thank you. Well, I'm just really happy that these, conversations are taking place. Whether it continues at the finance committee, I really appreciate that you guys are initiating conversation, willing to do the homework in order to try to get some of these things going. I think that's ideally what, the committee structure, in its prime can do. So I'm really, really thrilled for that. Whether it continues with the finance committee or as it was suggested, we come up with some sort of standing subcommittee for revenue generation with people who are experts. I would absolutely support that. I think that's something that I'd be willing to talk about at legislative committee. If you needed a subcommittee and that needed legislative committee's input, because that's also the committee system, right? But I think that that's a great idea. I think we always need to be adapting and looking at ways to improve services and lessen the burden, right, on the taxpayer. One thing that I noticed, I have maybe some follow-up on some things, but I don't need to go into every single bullet, right, like tonight.
Sure.
But one thing that I was thinking right off the bat was that you guys are gonna start working on a list of city-owned property and then criteria for whether or not we should keep it. And I think that might be something that the planning committee should also be involved in with regards to developing those criteria. So that would be my only suggestion that I would make in this forum. And then everything else are just kind of my thoughts based on where you were in the conversation, and probably, you know, I don't need to drag us back through all that.
No,
So,
good suggestion.
thanks. So, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak.
I think as to the subcommittee, my initial thought is by having Greg as our city administrator, I anticipate and have kind of already seen it happen is our finance committee meetings are going to start shortening in length. The last few that we've had, it's definitely different than when we didn't have him in place. So I think this is an opportunity for us as a finance committee. We may not be specialists, but at least we're starting the conversation. And I appreciate fellow council members recognizing that we're trying to take this initiative on. We, 4 of us have talked about this independently or in small groups for the time that we've been on council. And I'm glad that we're finally, thank you, Scott, for formalizing this and moving this forward. So now we're in a more formal state of just kind of looking at it. We've had a wide range of subjects that we talked about tonight. We all, I think each one of us has a little bit of homework to do. And, you know, there's nothing that stops us from having a conversation via our committee in 2 weeks. So I'm hoping by having Greg as our city administrator, just recapping, is that there will be time after the operational aspects of our commitment and committee that we go on to looking at this more strategically planning of revenue streams. I think it's important that we show the city taxpayers, not only ourselves, but them, that we're actively engaged in trying to find new ways of new revenue streams. They're concerned about the taxes. So if we can do something other than raise taxes, which is always the low hanging fruit, this stuff here is a little bit different. It's not easy, and it requires some more work on our part. So I just wanted to thank you guys for doing that. Oops, go ahead, Mark.
So, I mean, to your point, if we want to keep a committee structure, I'm comfortable with that. It would allow us to have the opportunity to invite some experts here. Again, I don't consider myself an expert, but why don't we spend that time asking some questions of folks that know things? I think that would be helpful.
Absolutely.
And if I could put one more kind of revenue idea on the table, and this is a very contentious one, but I'm going to put it out there. I mean, is it time to begin to talk about a city-town merger again? Is there benefit? I recognize, again, that's contentious and that's a hot topic, but, you know, as I understand, there's some benefit there.
Yeah, and I thought of that midway through the meeting and then totally forgot about it. So I'm really glad that you said that. They are electing a new town supervisor as well. And I think that that's been always kind of a sticking point. So it might be a good time to talk about that.
And then before we close up, I want to give the public an opportunity to talk. And Daniel, you're our only public representative tonight, so congratulations.
Thanks. I believe you all represent the public technically. But yeah, thank you. This is super interesting to me. I don't want to keep you all too long, so I was just going to offer, it so happens I'm about to start a job at a payment processing company called Stripe. And I've set up credit card payment type stuff for businesses in the past electronically. And so if, you know, as you're trying to figure out how to set those things up, if I can be of use, I'm happy to consult on that.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
So this is, in a sense, a company that will be creating alternatives to
It's a company that handles, it's a company called Stripe that handles credit card processing for most large software companies. Google, Amazon, Lyft, these folks. And their sort of competitive advantage is basically a very friendly user interface. So if you think about a few years back, every time you had to enter in a credit card online, it was quite awkward. And you can see older utilities, it's really, really painful to enter it. And on a lot of tech companies, Lyft or Uber or something, you put your card in and it will like guess what kind of card it is. It autofills in your address from the first line. It It's just, it's easy
Hmm,
for the end user.
okay. You think you're a little bit less than 2.65%?
It's not, it's not gonna be any cheaper. So in terms of the sort of like nuts and bolts of it, I'm not trying to sell them.
I
no,
understand,
it's-
but
it's
we're
interesting.
just looking at options.
Oh,
But it's also keeping up with the alternatives to the larger scheme of things, where there may be a competitive advantage for someone to charge less for something. But-
yeah, so, you know, if it's helpful, I'm happy to try it. I'm also happy to.
Well, we will conclude this special meeting of the Finance and Human Resource. I don't know if it's special. Yeah, thank you, everybody, for coming. Greg and Terry, appreciate everybody's time and effort. We can get a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.